Keep yourself in the loop of everything football. Listen to Alex and Jeremiah on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Hello there, I'm Jeremiah.
I am Alex, always and forever here.
Dedicated to college and NFL football. The latest football news on and off the field. NFL draft trade rumors. We've got you covered from the NFL, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything else in between. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Hello, welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, where we talk the latest news, rumors, and games of the NFL and college football, from the latest signings to this year's breakout starts and all of the news in between. As always, I am Alex. Jeremiah is in his hometown, just outside of Fresno. I forget the exact name of the town, but he is there for the week because of Thanksgiving, of course. So it's just me today. Anthony will be back tomorrow. Now, one thing I want to mention to make sure you guys know, Wednesday is the last day of this week for us because Thanksgiving, of course, is Thursday, and Friday we do not have a show. I would not be here anyways, but we will not have a show. So tomorrow we're going to be previewing the Thursday night games on Thanksgiving, and we're going to be previewing the weekend slate of games as well. So no wide left and no for real. We'll be breaking down everything. We'll be pretty much do those two segments, and we'll be doing a recap of tonight's college football playoff rankings, which I will get into in the last segment of the day before the break. A little quick, kind of like every week, kind of a guess as to what it'll look like. It shouldn't be very different, honestly. None of the four teams lost this week. It'll be much different next week as we have Ohio State and Michigan playing one another this weekend. But heading into tonight's ranking, I don't think it'll be much different. Also on today's show, we're going to be recapping last night's Monday Night Football game between the Houston Texans and the Oakland Raiders in Mexico City. And in between that, I'm going to update you guys on some injury news related to the Colts, the Vikings, the Chicago Bears, and some Thursday night games in terms of related to players and so on and so forth. So we're going to be doing that as well. Let's start, though, first with the Monday Night Football game, and a game in which the Oakland Raiders won in late fashion, defeating the Houston Texans 27-20, moving 8-2 on the year now, sole position to first place. Technically speaking, they had going into yesterday, in terms of yesterday night, they had a lead because the Chiefs had lost. Going into Sunday, the Chiefs and the Raiders were tied, and then the Chiefs had the tiebreaker at 7-2. Now they are 7-3. The Raiders moved 8-2 in sole possession of the AFC West. The Houston Texans, on the other hand, dropped to 6-4. They are still a game ahead of the Colts in first place there of the AFC South, but it's going to be interesting to see how this is going to shape out down the stretches, to say the least. It's a very interesting game. It's a very unique game. The Houston pretty strong in terms of their overall possession, 36 minutes to only 23 minutes of the Raiders, but the Raiders found a way to win it late at the same time. A very interesting game, honestly. At halftime, it was a tie game, 10-10. We had a Jalen Richard pass for 17 yards from Derek Carr. A field goal from each of those kickers, Nick Novak and Sebastian Janikowski, made it 3-3, and then a touchdown to Braxton Miller from Brock Osweiler before halftime. Not quite right before halftime, but before halftime, making it 10-10. We come out of halftime, and Lamar Miller has a 1-yard touchdown run on a drive coming out of halftime. Sebastian Janikowski tries to lessen the load. 17-13 with a field goal he makes there. Nick Novak makes a field goal to open the scoring in the fourth. And then from there, the Raiders found some long plays. Jameez Olawale, a 75-yard touchdown pass from Derek Carr, and an Amari Cooper 35-yard touchdown pass to go ahead in this game. Catch and run on both of those long plays. Now, those were exciting plays, but what was most interesting in this game to me was at halftime, oh boy, were there not much statistics there for the Raiders. I believe Derek Carr was under 100 yards passing. They had, I think, something like 10 yards rushing at that point, and they didn't end with a great rushing number in this game, 20 carries of a total of 5 players who carried the ball, including Derek Carr twice for -2 yards and Jamiz Olawale for -3 yards on 2 carries. But you had 3 running backs carry the ball for 16 total carries, 12 by Latavius Murray, a total carry yard mark of 30 on 20 carries. That's not good. 33 was your leading rusher from Latavius Murray, but Jalen Richard had 2, and then I mentioned those -5 total yards from the 2 rushes of each, Derek Carr and Jamiz Olawale. DeAndre Washington had a rush for 0 yards. So 30 yards, as opposed to the Texans, who had a pretty good rushing day. Lamar Miller, 104 yards on 24 carries, a touchdown for him. Brock Osweiler added to the fun there with 2 for 19, as a matter of fact. And then you had a couple rushes for a yard here, a yard there. And then Akeem Hunt, I believe, 5 rushes for -2 yards. But it gave him 124 as a team total. It's pretty good. It's pretty good for a team that has been winning games but not scoring a lot of points. Brock Osweiler looked pretty good in this one, 243 yards, a touchdown, and an interception in this one. He played well throughout. Derek Carr ended with 295 and 3. Played a little better down the stretch with those late touchdowns, of course. But this was a very interesting game because the Raiders were actually kind of slowed down, offensively for the first time in a few weeks. And then the Texans, their defense, of course, is playing well. But their offense, it could have been playing better, I suppose. The third down efficiency was pretty good for them, 8 for 16. The Raiders, on the other hand, 4 for 11. Both these teams are 1 for 2 on 4th down. But the biggest 4th down was a non-converted 4th down at near the end of the game there for the Texans, in which their running back was stopped short. He was reviewed, and he was stopped short. But Houston outgained them in yards. They had the ball in time of possession longer by 13 minutes almost. They led the turnover battle. The first downs, they had more. They really should have won this game. That comes down to it. 7 penalties for 101 yards. That won't help you out by any means. They got sacked only twice. That's much better for Osweiler than the last time he faced the Raiders. I'll tell you what, they sacked him right out of the AFC North. He was actually throwing the ball down the field a bit. He wasn't averaging 4 yards a pass. He was actually, getting the ball down there. He actually averaged a decent amount, 6.2 last night. So that was nice for him. But, the defense just couldn't hold him. And we see why the Raiders have won 4 straight, why they're 8-2, why it's their best start in 10 games since 2001. They're winning these games because they're scoring points. Their defense is getting better. They're getting opportune turnovers, They only had 1. Or excuse me, they had 2. They had 1 last night with their interception. Michael Crabtree fumbled the ball, and of course, the interception from Derek Carr in that one. But there was a lot in this game that was just kind of weird. Whether it was the offensive play of the Raiders, whether it was Brock Osweiler dealing with a god-awfully strong laser pointer in his face through the game, a green laser pointer from who knows where on the field, but man, was it strong. You had, the long plays, obviously. You had a supposed touchdown that looked like it'd be a touchdown, long pass, touchdown kind of deal that got called back, and was he out, wasn't he out? A lot of going on. One thing that you can look at is Mexico City did an absolutely great job in showing the NFL why they should have more games there. A turnout of something like 74,000 people. They did a great job. Everything looked great. They were very loud in a good way, cheering. And it was, it would have been a really good game atmosphere. So that was nice. And they definitely did everything they should have done in this one to really show the NFL, like, hey, come back here. We know it's been a while now, but come on back. We appreciate football too. So that was nice. But at the end of the day, the Raiders do win this one. Like I said, moved 8-2, sole possession of that first place. Houston remains in possession of first place, but only by a game now, in a spot I know they would like to have picked up 2 games over Indianapolis this weekend, heading into the Thanksgiving Day games for them, in a game in which I'll talk about here in a minute after the first break in relation to some injuries. Before I will leave, though, I want to mention one cool little statistic, and I feel like there's at least one little cool statistic from every week in the NFL, but this one is pretty cool. Sebastian Janikowski, of course, with his extra point in the second quarter, he has become the first player to score a point in his third country, but it's very specific in a sense. So he's actually the second one to do so, but in this order: the United States, United Kingdom, and Mexico. Joe Nedney, the only other one to do so. There are 5 other players that have scored in Canada, the United States, and the UK, and that is running back Steven Jackson, and then kickers Robbie Gould, Matt Bryant, and Dan Carpenter, and Jay Feely. So in terms of Mexico, United States, and the UK, it is Joe Nedney and Sebastian Janikowski. I feel like he's the all-time leading scorer for the Raiders. I feel like he's really up there in the NFL. He's been there for a long time. He's one of the best kickers ever. It's a nice little thing to add to your resume, I think. Pretty cool, Sebastian. Pretty cool. But all right, let's take our first break. We're going to come back and we're going to talk some injuries, some things related to games heading into this weekend. Short week for some teams, long week for some teams. It's going to be interesting to see how it goes. But we'll get into that in just a minute here at the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello, welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, and we're going to get into some injuries right now. As it stands, going into Thursday's game, Thanksgiving, against the Steelers, Andrew Luck is in concussion protocol. As that game nears, I feel like it's tough anytime you have an injury, but especially in concussion heading into a very short week, Sunday to Thursday. But he sustained it late in the win over the Titans, 24-17 this Sunday, as well as Clayton Gaithers. He suffered a concussion as well. So both of them their status, I wouldn't say is in doubt, but it's definitely questionable heading into this game. To say the least, Chuck Pagano was quoted saying, well, after we were all done with the locker room, both guys didn't feel right, went in the training room, both were evaluated for concussions. Both are in the protocol. Luck was sacked twice. He was hit 8 times in that game. I think the play, he was sacked late in the game. He got thrown down and the back of his head hit the turf. So that is kind of, people were thinking where he got the injury. If he's not cleared to play, Scott Tolzien will start in his place. Tolzien is 56 of 91 with 721 yards and a touchdown and 5 interceptions in 6 appearances, but he has not attempted one pass since 2013. If they're going to want Luck out there, if he's healthy enough to play, of course. If he's healthy, they're going to want him out there. You're playing the Steelers, in which Ben Roethlisberger in the last 2 games is 64 for 88 with 888 yards, 10 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and 2 wins. Now, both of those games were in Pittsburgh, but, it's not like he's a horrible on-the-road player. So knock on wood, as a Steeler fan, keep that up. But he set a franchise record 2 years ago with 522 passing yards in a 51-34 win over the Colts, and that's tied for 4th most in NFL history. I believe he also had 4 touchdowns in that game, or 6. I forget what it was, but he went on an absolute just clinic, to say the least. But they're going to want, their strongest team. No offense to Scott Tolzien, but as it stands, I would want, if I'm a Colts fan, I know I would want Andrew Luck out there. So it's going to be interesting to see if he can be ready in time. Of course, it's not a joke. Concussions are not something to play around with. If they can play Luck safely, then I'm sure they will do so. But after Thursday's game, the Colts don't play again until December 5th against the New York Jets. It might be smarter to maybe hold him out. As he says about Tolzien, Chuck Pagano said he has limited amount of exposure, but he is a pro. Again, if he has to roll and be the guy, then he'll do a great job. He prepares really well every single day. So, interesting to say the least on how this goes. They have a 2-game winning streak, being 5-5, and a game out of first place now. After winning this weekend, actually, technically 2 games, I believe, because they're 5-5 and 6-4. Well, technically 1 game, depending on win and loss, how it stands. But we'll see how that goes, and we'll update you if we get more news tomorrow heading into Thursday. Another person who was injured this weekend is injured for the second time this season, and that is Bears quarterback Jay Cutler. He's undergoing tests to determine the severity of a shoulder injury he withstood, and he took on Sunday in their game against the Giants. The Chicago Tribune was the first to report it could be season-ending. As a matter of fact, he suffered this game in their loss to the Giants, like I mentioned, the 22-16 loss from Sunday. He was sacked 4 times by the Giants, including a quote-unquote vicious hit by New York defensive end Olivier Vernon on the Bears' second play from scrimmage. That his hit resulted in a 15-yard roughing the passer penalty. Matt Barkley is the only quarterback left on the roster. He's preparing to start if Cutler misses time. He did see some time when Brian Hoyer broke his arm earlier, and Cutler was still injured earlier in the year. He completed 6 of 15 pass attempts for 81 yards, 2 picks. 1 pick was not really his fault. And you look back at this year, tumultuous year for the Bears. Obviously, you had him as a broken thumb, I think. He had a thumb injury that forced him to leave week 2, and he sat out the next 5 weeks before returning to the lineup the week after Brian Hoyer broke his arm and Matt Barkley saw some action. In 5 games, though, Cutler has thrown 5 interceptions and lost 2 fumbles, and he is a free agent after this year. So it's really going to be interesting to see where they go from here in terms of Cutler, if they re-sign him, if they choose to get younger in the draft, get a young quarterback, a trade for a guy, It's going to be interesting to see how they go about it because, Cutler, they haven't really won there. He's got set to make $2 million cap hit if they trade or release Cutler in the offseason, actually. So he's got 1 year, I think, after the season. So the move would open about $13 million of cap space. Might be worth something to do, so we'll have to keep an eye on that, of course. And last but not least, we look at Minnesota Vikings running back Adrian Peterson. Yes, Adrian Peterson, who's been out of the media for a while now. It's closer to return from a knee injury than one might have thought. He underwent surgery to repair a right lateral meniscus tear back on September 22nd and has been reported as making solid progress in his recovery and could be back on the field by mid to late December. Apparently he had an exam last week and could start running this week. Although he is said to be exercising caution in his return from knee injury, so he could still make his return before the end of the regular season. If Peterson stays on track, 2 possibilities for his return could be the home game against the Indianapolis Colts on December 18th, or the Vikings rematch against the Packers in the game in which he was hurt the first time in their game against the Packers at Lambeau Field on December 24th on New Year's Eve. 5 years to the day since Peterson tore his left ACL against the Redskins. The running back had returned from that injury in less than 9 months, winning the MVP on the back of that. So he has definitely established a reputation as a quick healer. Now, the Vikings waived Ronnie Hillman on Monday, adding defensive end Stephon Weatherly to their active roster. Now they only have Jarrett McKinney and Matt Asiata at the running back position. Peterson eventually returning would change the dynamic of the offense, even though at times Peterson did not look good whatsoever, really, even when he was healthy. I didn't think so. They were not running the ball well. It was something very, very different for people to see of the Vikings because Adrian Peterson, even when the Vikings are good, would get his yards. But, man, was he just not looking good this year, When he got hurt, he was sitting at 31 attempts for 50 yards, and that was through, I think, a few games. I mean, he was not playing well at all. No touchdowns on the year. He was averaging just 1.6 yards a carry. Not typical Adrian Peterson style statistics, not what you'd expect out of him. 1.6 yards a carry, I don't expect that out of Adrian Peterson. I expect that out of maybe of the running backs, maybe Matt Asiata, of course, Jarrett McKinnon, not Adrian Peterson. He wasn't the leading rusher on that team when he was healthy, I think. So I don't really know what to expect if he gets healthy and comes back. I really don't. But I'm going to be interested to see if he could get moving, I think it'll be interesting to see because, yes, he can be healthy. Do you want to bring him back? What happens if he gets hurt again, Are you fearful of that? So it's going to be interesting. He played in 2 games, one in which they won. He had 19 rushes for 31 yards. And then the Green Bay game when she got hurt, 12 rushes for 19 yards. Not really impressive, to say the least. So it'd be interesting to see what happens. And, of course, the more news we get on that, we will update you on. But I got to take my last break. I'm going to come back. I'm going to look at the college football playoff rankings, what they look like heading into tonight, what they might look like heading out of tonight, and I'll get going. So I'll be right back here at the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
And we are back here at the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the college football playoff rankings just before we end the show. It'll be a real quick conversation. But I just want to let you guys know what the AP poll looks like heading into tonight. A little different because Louisville did lose. We have Ohio State at number 2 still, Michigan at number 3. That'll change obviously when they play. Obviously Alabama's at number 1. So it's Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, Clemson for the top 4 spots. That probably won't change in the playoffs, but I'll tell you what will change in my opinion in just a moment. So we have those 4 teams. We have Wisconsin, Washington, Oklahoma, Penn State, Colorado, and Oklahoma State to round out the top 10. So the first 2 out being Wisconsin and Washington. Now, as it stands, the college football playoff poll, the rankings for that was Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, Clemson, Louisville, Washington last week. Obviously, Louisville lost to Houston, 36-10. It's a big loss. They're probably going to drop 2. I'd say maybe as low as 10. So 1 through 4, all won. The biggest win going for Alabama at Chattanooga, 31-3, expected, obviously, when you're playing Chattanooga. Ohio State narrowly escaped a defeat to Michigan State, 17-16, and Michigan defeated Indiana, 20-10. But again, they do play one another this week. This week is not going to be the big shakeup. Now it'll be the following week. That'll be a week from today we'll be talking about. Oh, man, what is this going to look like now? One team can't stay. One team can't. One team has to go. And we have Clemson at the 4 spot. And then obviously Louisville lost. Washington, they defeated Arizona State 44-18. Purdue loses to Wisconsin. They keep winning 49-20. And Penn State defeats Rutgers 39-0. Now, what's interesting to me is what's going to look like the 4 and 6, because Louisville obviously out. Washington probably going to be 5 or 6. Who's going to have that other spot though? Wisconsin obviously has 1, but both their losses being to Michigan and Ohio State. Those are strong losses. But Penn State, on the other hand, defeated Ohio State. That's a decently strong win there. Do they jump Wisconsin? Is it Washington, Penn State at the 5 and the 6? In whatever order they put them. Is it going to be Wisconsin, Washington? Is Oklahoma going to get anywhere near there? Oklahoma coming off their win against West Virginia, 56-28, pretty big. They've won a lot of games in the last few weeks. It's going to be interesting. Washington heads into this week. On Friday, they're playing for the Pac-12 North Championship. They're playing, in a sense, for their relative playoff lives in the sense, too, because there'll be a spot that opens up if they can get to 5 when Clemson and Michigan play one another. I'm sorry, Ohio State and Michigan play one another. That'll be really interesting to see if they're in the 5 spot, if they can move back into the top 4. But, needless to say, they're playing a Washington State team that is not, as easy of a win as it has been in the past, They narrowly lost to Colorado this week, and, they're still ranked, so it'll be interesting to see what happens in this one. But they control their destiny. Who's going to join them in the first 2 out, in my opinion? And it's going to be interesting. I might go Bama, Ohio State, Michigan, Clemson, Washington, Penn State. I really might. With the strength of Penn State's wins to the strength of Wisconsin's losses, I don't know. I might have to go Penn State there. It'll be very interesting to see exactly what happens in this one, because it's not going to be the big shakeup at the top. It's going to be 6 through 10, and what's going to look interesting to me. It's going to be interesting to see where Oklahoma sits. How far does Louisville fall? Is Colorado going to move up in the top 10? Is all of the 7, 8, 9, 10 teams from last week in terms of Wisconsin, Penn State, Oklahoma all going to move up? It's going to be really interesting to see. I'm excited for tonight. I really am. Last week was an interesting, I guess, I expected it to be a big shape-up with 2, 3, and 4 all losing, but I guess it wasn't as big as I had hoped. This week is not going to be very big. Next week is the one to really keep an eye on. But this week will be interesting from the 6th through the 10th. I'm definitely interested in that one. So, needless to say, we will let you know everything tomorrow and what happens. And, of course, like I mentioned earlier, we are going to do the Thursday night previews of the 3 games. We have the Cowboys game. We obviously have the Vikings game. And then the game I mentioned earlier, Steelers and Colts, and that's the night game. And then we're going to preview the weekend games as well. I'm excited. I never get to preview the weekend games. I'm always gone on Friday. So I'm excited for that. But, of course, we'll do all that tomorrow and more if we feel the need. Any news that breaks, of course. But until then, it's time to go. Anthony and Ben will be back tomorrow. I believe Ben might be joining us. I'm not sure. But I know Anthony is going to be here. And we're going to do all the previewing that you can even believe. But until then, I'd like to thank you for listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast for Anthony and Ben and Jeremiah. My name is Alex. And I will see you guys tomorrow. You enjoy the rest of your day. And we'll talk then. Have a good one, guys.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.